available to let them know what the goals are. Like the goals of my understanding that you can't have more than a quorum of members from your board. But it's also a way you can get the community who's not on the board to actually come and be involved.
That's what's really surprising me, how faithfully so-called volunteers are paid. I first saw it, like I said, in the camera, when she's a firm proponent. Less than that, so she's been in there, but it was a way we got things done. That's when we restructured strategic partnership fund. But they have a template for it now, and you can refer back to that if you want, because we set it up with rubrics, mission, goals, objectives, all of that. When they retrofitted strategic partnership funds for the city of Asheville.
Yeah, it really takes a leader to make that happen. So somehow the leader of this group has stepped up.
What's the vision of how to bring in more
Standard operating procedures is another thing we need to recommend.
Right.
Nina, you have a comment?
Yes. One of the things that my perception is that underutilized resource are neighborhood associations. And, I live in Shiloh. We have some city liaison who show up. Sometimes, not every meeting. These organizations are community engagement personified. And they're the folks who have to hear their neighborhood, and they have to hear their participants, and getting them engaged with boards and commissions is probably the fastest, in my view, fastest pipeline is getting people who are already committed to act on behalf of their communities.
They have a recommendation from the Reparations Commission to impact boards and commissions. And I put together a pro forma budget for them. Each one of those, particularly the legacy neighborhoods, for a minimum of $250K to get started the process.
So it seems to me that the folks who are tapped at the city level to do community liaison need to have as part of their brief the process of encouraging and motivating and inviting participation on boards for the folks that they're interacting with on a neighborhood level. And to me, that's kind of a no-brainer. That's a pipeline of folks who are already active and in a network on the neighborhood level.
And just get ready for this meeting. I looked at all of the organizations or the groups that had responded back to our member survey. And some of them are called committees. Some of them are called commissions. Some of them are called boards. So one of the things I think we need to have in our report is there a definition of each of those things? And what's the differential? And
If there is no difference.
yeah, I think there is supposed to be a difference. Yeah, there's something about that commission name that is a big difference. And I think that would then clarify, I think that with the urban trail, so the urban trail, or we could leave anytime we wanted to, whether we had quorum or not. We've never established a quorum for this group, so we don't even have one. But we've never done that with the urban trail because we're this ad hoc kind of thing. But I would think the commissions probably do have something that says that they can't meet unless it's a formally addressed meeting. But committees might be able to. Again, boards, I look at the word board as in between a commission and a committee as far as what their legal status is, but I could be wrong on that. Just from my work in a nonprofit, say you're a board member, you have fiduciary responsibilities and governance responsibilities. And I don't know if that applies to these groups.
Some of them are enacted by resolution, like the Reparations Commission. So,
Well, then that would be stated in there what
It
level
does,
they do. So it's probably would be a good idea to kind of ferret that out a little bit. But I do think that the standard operating procedures. And I would, to standardize how staff is functioning and looking at all of these in some way, so that I have a feeling that some staff members are putting in a shitload of work, excuse the language, and others aren't, as we know that always happens. But if they had a certain level of responsibility or clarity on what their role was and what they were supposed to produce in the energy, I think it would be helpful, because some of them may, you know, like I think all of us here are probably kind of a personalities overdue, to always go to the top of it, try to get everything done and all. But there are some staff people that don't look at it that way. They get the minimum done and are proud of what they've done with the minimum. But what I don't, you know, so I think that we need to try to give them some basis of what they're supposed to. I think the staff, their supervisor should give them some sense of what they're supposed to do, what the expectations are. Because it does, I don't think it's true that they know exactly what their expectations are.
Do we have a survey question that addresses that?
We do in a way that they, yes, were told what their expectations were or what their roles were. But I guess what I'm saying is it should standardize across all liaison positions. And maybe it depends on if you're doing commission or commission and what's required to go back to staff.
Yeah, the other area that I noticed relatively high variability is the amount of communication that occurs between commission board chair and staff, or staff's liaisons to that that board. So some of them are engaged and meet. Chairs meet with staff. Some don't seem to be. And I think one of the recommendations I made was have chairs and staff meet on a regular basis. So they're on the same line of their body. They understand what the workload is and what they're trying to achieve. They communicate to the city council.
Yeah. Germane to that is the duties of the staff, supports of the commission, is distributed a while back. And specifically, it says, starts out with generally maintaining a working relationship with our chair, serves as a resource on various things, set up meetings, maintain attendance, take advantage of minutes, manage an update committee webpage, but generally does not, in all caps, does not word for or at the direction of the board.
That's right.
It's not responsible for facilitating meetings, simply to support the chair. The chair is the one responsible. But again, it's a leadership issue. I think we've
Need to
got-
empower the officers to really like take charge of what's going on.
Exactly, and I think that goes back again to what we've said is to how are the chairs chosen.
About privileges mostly and who you know. And that, I'm just speaking to that, I want to be very candid about it. That is a problem with getting effective results out of their board commission that I've seen. And probably over 50% is that you have ineffective officers and people at the top. I don't know how, it's usually voted on by the body that's there. And I'm just gonna be very frank, it is a huge impediment to just focus on what they're doing.
If y'all found that to be true, do your
I'm so
other
sorry,
groups
Ms.
deserve to be
Frank,
your
but-
chair and all are?
Yeah, we've elected on like a yearly basis, and certainly the attitude and the leadership of the chair has a lot to do with the, environment that is created.
Sure.
Whether
Is that something that could be mitigated or improved by having a standard onboarding process that says, congratulations, you're chair of this group. here are the expectations about how you manage it. Here's how often you're going to report to council. Here's how often you're going to meet with your staff, your city liaison. Here's the expectations for what contributions you're expected to make in this position.
And here's the schedule for you to go to the school of government. Good job.
So, but there should be a parallel onboarding of staff.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so
Absolutely. I think my impression
they
in
understand
general,
what they're.
what we've learned from the information that we've received so far is that there is no standard operating procedure that holds true for everybody who participates in boards and commissions, whether they're staff, whether they're engaged citizens or whatever. And I'm not saying that everyone should be exactly a cookie cutter of the other, but it may be reasons to modify certain ways depending on circumstances. But there should be a baseline set of expectations, standard procedures, reporting requirements, expectations that people will show up at council once a quarter to deliver their perspective or something like that. So that people, and if they have to go to an afternoon onboarding session or something like that, to get the lay of the land and understand, then that should be a thing. That should be just part of the expectation of what happens when you do on this
I
role.
think we should even make that a highlighted section of our recommendation.
Well, and I would say that's potentially even a theme of our recommendations as well, because it seems like from the public's perspective, from staff's perspective, from council's perspective, the lack of consistency causes issues, and it's hard to solve any of those issues when we don't have a consistent process across the boards. So maybe that's like kind of the missing piece that allows some of these challenges to be solved, is actually doing it the same across every board.
And then you have a Bible somewhere, online resource or paper or something like that. What do you do in situation X? And there's
Call it subject matter expert.
there is a procedure to handle it. I don't know how to get such and so done. Well, talk to your staff liaison. If that doesn't work, then go up the chain or whatever, just so that people know where they can get help if issues arise. They
Yeah,
have
we found what the county commissioners did. So we're in the operations, was put some of us on board as subject matter experts, like I talked about, to pull the stall out to, and it's been really helpful because nobody's an expert in all areas. So, we found that some folks may not have expertise even though they're chairs. So,
This copy that
we will bring subject matter experts.
Stacy
out
distributed
depending on what,
did not have the additions that both Dee and I put in today.
Right, yeah, she probably couldn't.
But I've got a copy from just before I came in.
There might be a copy machine. If you go to the Development Services Office, it's the main
I was
room,
just
just
gonna say,
around to
if
the
we're
right.
going
They might be able to do that.
Care about, like getting the chairs some guidance, and one recommendation that I would thoroughly wholeheartedly support is to have specific training. At least quarterly or something, especially when it comes to parliamentary procedure. So that is something that staff also mentioned as being a challenge. And so as you were talking about, having like a handbook basically for an officer, these are what your responsibilities are. I certainly think that could help some people. I also, just like knowing the officers that I've worked with before, I can also see where some people just wouldn't care still. But I mean, you kind of have to blame the body for electing someone who doesn't really care.
That's why I think that everyone should participate in a common onboarding situation, so that they all go into their meetings with the same expectations about how things are going to get done. And if they're not happening, they have an opportunity to say to a staff liaison or whatever, this body is not functioning the way we were told it's supposed to. And, you know, that gives you the opportunity to like, to either nudge the officer that is doing business the way would be most productive, or, you know, get changes in guard.
And in all the boards that I've been on have some type of annual meeting, annual retreat or something. Maybe having like a training refresher type stuff, because it seems like now they're doing quarterly training for newly appointed board members, and they've encouraged those people who have already been appointed, but you know, when before the training was instated, they've encouraged them to attend them. I don't know what the actual attendance rate has been. Even so, for the people who are newly appointed, it's still a required thing. So if that's part of like a regular meeting or an annual meeting, that tends to be a little bit longer to include like the training refresher on some of those things.
Yeah, I don't mind that this basic stuff should be mandatory, and then it should, and then everyone who participates should be part of it, because if you have 2 people in the group who are officers and 5 people who aren't, the 5 people who aren't need to know what standards folks are being expected to follow. And if they don't know that, then they're at the mercy of their leadership, who could just say, no, we're not going to do it that way. And then,
I tend to agree that I kind of feel the inconsistency stems from the city doing certain things like offering trainings, but not requiring it. You know, I'm hesitant to make the system too rigid, but they should be tracking who has done the training and following up with the people who haven't. Because when you're on a board, everyone has to have the same basic level of knowledge of procedure and the charge of the board to be effective. So I could see considering making that, formalizing some of those processes as a recommendation.
I agree wholeheartedly, but when you've got a city council or county commission that in certain years, they haven't even, all of their members have not attended elected officials training in the school of government. And that's sort of kind of required, but not required in that if you don't go, you don't serve.
Right.
You're kicked off. So it's like, I don't need to get that. You know, so I can see where this might be hard, but I agree with all of you that it's the only way to get some kind of consistency and a level of competency and excellence.
well, demonstrated commitment. Yeah, let me add the other side of it, which is I think there needs to be a carrot as well as a stick. So there should be a basic minimal expectation of participation in training and understanding procedure and all that. On the opposite side, what can we do to make the experience of serving on a board more rewarding, more gratifying, more meaningful?
Means I has to give you a coffee cup with the
Pretty much. One thought I have about this, and this is one of my, unfortunately, I apologize for not getting involved with this argument before this meeting. But one of my thoughts about that is that I think, as we identified, one of the big weaknesses was communication with council and the feeling of advocacy with council. That, you know, you want to first feel like, why am I wasting my time? Well, if there was a standard expectation and a procedure that every quarter the board would show up and be given time on the agenda to make a report about what they've been doing for the last 3 months, what their recommendations are, so that they have an opportunity to publicly show where they stand on the issues they're investigating.
Thank you.
I believe that is motivational for people. Feel that their work isn't just languishing away or going through bureaucratic channels or is this same thing that we're looking at already?
So the updated version,
Oh, that's it.
you both updating it today.
What time are y'all updating? I thought I printed it pretty late.
You got most of the comments, but I guess not all.
In a choice, I also think that commission should be given like more dedicated time to like directly present to council, or at least a like, you know, aligned council committee. Not currently, nothing is stopping the committees from getting a group of 4 members together and showing up at public input, except that staff members tend to like, not, there's very clear messaging that like, you should not get up there and speak on behalf of the whole group. In fact, they really discourage people from doing that. And it's kind of like grounds for getting kind of like kicked off. So there is kind of this like sort of general, I don't want to say fear, but discouraging of people getting up there and like speaking on behalf of the commissions. And so I think there needs to be more encouragement of doing that when, you know, when the whole group, letting the group know that that is an option.
I think it should be scheduled.
I have an issue with each year the council meets at their retreat and comes up with a series of goals that they've already exercised. Where does it say that the committees need to be realigned with those goals each year? And why should they? When they have a specific charge, at least supposed to, set up an ordinance that they're supposed to meet. And yet council expects the realignment with those goals coming out of their retreat.
Well, it's not this year, last year, I think it was, I think
Go with their priority work.
city of Asheville's retreat. Not once until the last hour of the retreat did they ever mention the word downtown. And at the time of this retreat was when we were having a lot of violence and problems were downtown. And we didn't have enough police officers or law enforcement downtown. It was a mess downtown. It was dirty, it was dark, it was not good. Not once did they mention it. And at one of the breaks, Leslie said, "What are you doing?" And so if you were to look at what their goals were, though, you would not need to have, from that retreat, I'm not going to need this one because I didn't watch this carefully. You shouldn't have a downtown commission. You shouldn't have a river redevelopment. You shouldn't have public art and culture, because none of that is on their radar as far as their goals were concerned. So you're right. How does that tie in? And how do you keep it tied in as we move through the 4 years of the strategic measures?
Why should a complete realignment? Unaligned.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. I just kind of circling back to what Nina mentioned about having scheduled time for reports to council. I just feel that actually is an important concept that we should consider, because I think, you know, to make people's service to the city valuable, you can compensate them for the time, you can make it easy, but the other way is the work has to matter. It doesn't matter if you give people some stipend if it's a waste of time. And I think one of the best ways the city could do that across every board, instead of figuring out how to empower this board and that one, which would have to be different for every board, creating a formal process, an annual report to council is a really big way the city could actually give some duties to every board, give them a slot on the agenda to come and share what they think the city should be focusing on, making it more of a bi-directional conversation instead of boards need to get aligned with council priorities and, you know, do their work behind the scenes.
I definitely thank you for reframing that. I think that it should be more often than annual. Part of the advantage of this is that if someone from the board is saying something by that board to go and presentation, it could be just a 5-minute presentation of what they've been up to and what other recommendations are coming together, or if they have final recommendations about something. It also forces the board to actually focus, because they're not going to want to go up there and go hum. They're going to want to say, what have we been doing? It's being productive. and whatever he recommended to the city. So it's a little bit like assigning homework. It's a little bit like saying, you were gonna show up and tell the city what you actually think it ought to be doing on this project. And it has to be on the agenda. It has to be on an equal footing with staff reports and, you know, other things that are elevated to a level of something that council is taking as part of their business as usual, not make people come and do public comment. Oh my God, no. I mean, as a person who regularly sits through council meetings and does a lot of public comment, that is not the way to get taken seriously on the government level, alas. Unless you show up with 200 people and then maybe you don't pay attention. But
So what we're talking about is prioritizing the work of the boards before council. Beyond just submitting an annual report or
do it in public.
you're right, because we don't know. I remember when I was serving on that, I never knew what ever happened to those reports that were submitted, well, at least once a year.
And on public record.
Yeah, but if they're before council at a formal meeting, then it has a little more clout. At least you're getting their attention.
The press
Right.
covers it.
The only way that I get anything done is like with August performance audit. I'm gonna be very frank with you, talk not only with the staff, but the city manager. City manager pretty much is a job. Submits everything to city council. And then it requires the chair of the board or the vice chair to come and make a public presentation. It's on record. That is exactly what happened. I learned that technique just recently. As far as the performance audit, because we got a lot of pushback from that. But they're sitting down, city manager, staff, and big council. So I don't know if that is something that can be replicated, but I found it to be much more useful than having staff. A lot of times they don't want you usurping their expertise, as it were, or whatever the role that they have. And I also found with the transit group, we kept pushing for transit-oriented development. Fell on deaf ears and finally we put it into the house. So I used the same technique. I don't know if it'll work on this overall concept, but just, lobbying the staff to do it by themselves. Certainly not.
Well, first off, we have to acknowledge that you have a unique relationship with staff at the city.
It's kind of.
And there is a difference there. And I feel that I do too. I can call up, and I have called up managers and managers. This is my specific problem. That's an anomaly. Not every citizen, not every board, council, or commission member is going to feel comfortable doing that. Nor is it the most effective way to do it as a whole. Because then all the manager is doing is fielding calls from the residents all day long. And I'm not sure that that's a good.
I can go call her. I said it first. I don't call. And the city attorney and the county attorney.
But we got that. That's not the most.
That's not a usual way.
It's not a usual way.
But you're gonna point me to a commission if I can see it in the face.
So, I mean, I think the goal here is what do we recommend? And I'm recommending that we normalize and expect boards to make presentations to council at a public meeting.
Right.
And that they should be put on the agenda and taken as seriously as staff reports and as other kinds of reports that come up.
The only person who can facilitate is the city manager. She's the only one from the staff and the county manager. That's just it. I mean, if you really want
Okay. Well, then what we could do is not recommend that everybody call Deborah directly, but get her to agree that the way to do this is to give the committees a more public facing role
Well, I
than
mean,
what they have now.
I mean, certainly it seems to me that council could say, we expect quarterly reports from the boards. And, let's have it on the agenda.
Right. How many would vote for that? I know the Deborah County would say, no, audit and real life are two different things.
Well, it's been my experience that once such an idea is in play, then what we get to happen is enough people make us about it.
Yeah, but the fuzzes don't work. I'd rather do it more diplomatic and like she has some power and authority. That's something, I mean, if you don't feel comfortable doing it, there's some people who do. So just want to get the thing done. I don't care how it's done.
Well, let's start, you know, these are just recommendations. These are recommendations. And what I'm looking at is in the key takeaways, from the JAM board, that's this gray document. You have greater, more frequent communication, lack of public awareness and engagement, onboarding and meetings format. I think it covers a lot of what we've been talking about, are falling into those areas. And I think it looks like, based on what the JAM board is saying, that those are big issues with what we've been pulling up out of the report. And I think that we can, you know, I don't think any of these recommendations are going to be one sentence and that's it. I think it'll be a sentence with some bullet points or, you know, some step down stuff that further illuminates that particular recommendation.
And I think we should also pay attention to which common issues we're addressing with each of these. Like when we're talking about giving boards the ability to report back to council publicly, I think of that disempowerment theme that was really the primary issue that Elise highlighted to council in her previous presentation. How do we fix that? By actually creating formal channels for boards to do productive work and a more visible way for them to share their work with everyone in Asheville.
It's also a way to encourage community engagement, because people who do pay attention to council meetings will have some insight into what the boards are actually doing and recommending in a less filtered way and in a way that is more likely to get people involved.
So if you go back to these key takeaways, one of the things that, as Alan pointed out, that we have is this clarity of mission and alignment of goals with council priorities. And again, I think this, if both sides of these groups, the council and boards, commissions, committees, were more aware of the alignment, it would gain more traction. If they were both working toward a better, if council was clear on their mission as it aligned with these different committees and commissions, then I think everybody would be more open and anxious to hear what these boards, commissions, and committees are doing out there and how they're moving the mission forward.
So could that change annually based on priorities of that given year? Or should council be drawing to brush strokes, saying these general areas that we would like to have you respond to in terms of your work efforts and then you're reporting back to us as a board commission?
I think it's up to the board. I mean, like MMTC, when we set our goals for the year, you know, we looked at the council priorities. The council priorities aren't a secret. They're like out there pretty much.
Right.
And it's really, you know, the council can't focus on a good thing. Let's be realistic about it. They have some key focus areas, and I think it's really up to the boards when they're setting their goals for the year to see how they can fit into that. And every board can, you know, like MMTC, it's not like transit was listed as a council priority, but it's part of the core services. Transit is part of affordable housing or being an affordable community. So you just have to like learn how to discuss the topic that the board is focused on as it relates to the council priorities. And yeah, the council priorities change a little bit each year, but they've been,
And it's a
last year,
measurable
this
growth.
year, they're essentially the same.
I'd like to add that we also have a large scale, multi-decade vision document, City of Asheville, that gets mentioned every single time the city passes an ordinance. It's in alignment with the master plan and the boards should be clear about how their work supports that vision. Because that, aside from priorities, council priorities don't cover everything. So there are going to be some gaps there, but that doesn't mean those boards and commissions should go away or be quiet. They're going to do the continuing work that fills in the gaps that aren't covered by those specific priorities and that are in alignment with the vision document for the whole city for them.
And the staff should be there to help convey.
Yeah, I've been chatting.
priorities.
He's gonna tell me if he has something he wants me to say, and I'll say it.
So that's a key responsibility of staff then, to make sure that the boards that they're liaison to are aware of what those priorities are for their community.
Hey, those council priorities are gonna be part of the onboarding process. I don't know if they are, but,
They are the thing.
yeah, hell.
But, and so, yes, I do think that at the beginning of every year, the councils, boards and commissions committee boards and commissions should evaluate the work they're doing, what they have identified as or the unfinished business they have for the previous year, and then see how that aligns. Now, again, I know with the transit commission, one of our first things that we identified is that we needed bus schedules in the language other than English, and the color coded. Now, we needed, I think at one time we realized we needed 17 different colors for a color coding map of the actual transit. New York Transit doesn't have that many colors, but we needed that many colors, and we had to get new software for it, so that took getting it into the budget and getting it into the budget as a year. You got another wait another year for the money to drop, blah, blah, blah. It took 6 years for that to happen. But that was still, it was part of equity. We weren't talking about equity at that time, but it was. People were wanting to eliminate transit into Hillcrest. He said, you want to lose your federal funding? Go right ahead. And people had no idea that serving the underserved neighborhoods was tantamount to our federal fund. And federal funding is what, 75% of transit or something like that. So yeah, you can't walk away from that. But again, nobody knew that. We had 4 or 5 meetings before some of us actually put that together. So, there are things that you're going to be working on that do take a long time, particularly if they require money. That's going to take a minimum of 2 years. And you've got to go from that particular spot. But that doesn't mean that they need to go away because you had a priority last, council has a priority last year. If the problem hasn't been fixed, it still should be on somebody's list to get it, to keep moving forward on it. Now, they may have things that rise up a little bit more, like they had to reevaluate where public safety is on their priority list. That used to be very low, now it's much higher. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't important 2 years ago. But you just got to, and so that's why I think this communication is important, and part of it is to keep reminding the council, 2 years ago, you wanted us to have a better tree umbrella in the city. Well, it takes a little while to grow a tree. So you got to give it some time, and this is what we're doing to move toward that. So I think that the communication, and once you start getting into that mode, I think it'll be easier, and they'll see that everybody is moving forward, but some people are at the front of the bus have a different view than at the back of the bus, but everybody is in the same bus.
So this is why this is why I'm pushing so hard for public reporting.
Right.
Because if you don't have the transparency, you don't get the accountability. And If you have a priority one year that drops off the radar the next year for some reason, a ongoing board that is working on that shows up at council meeting 4 times a year and says, we're still working on this. You charged us with working on this. Here's where we're at. We need to stay focused, we need to be part of this budgeting process. We still need to be part of the communication around this, because that's what you said you wanted. Being in alignment with the big vision document rather than a narrower, shorter set of priorities helps keep the big picture in mind. Because not all of these boards and commissions will be easily pigeonholed to one of the current priorities. And if they have to twist themselves in presses to make it seem like they are, that's going to actually delegitimize them rather than giving them more weight.
I don't know that that's necessarily true, but it would be a good. It's something that one should do. It's something that they should be looking at.
There was a suggestion actually made by a survey respondent to align the boards with a comprehensive plan.
That may have been me.
Well, and I would also, I think accountability is an interesting word to choose here. I mean, I wonder if that is ways that boards could support both council and the city overall to make sure things we say we're doing are actually getting done. Right now I feel like that gets dumped on staff to maybe report back on it. And sometimes then staff have a disincentive to report back on it if it's not going the way it should be. I mean, I think of like the Urban Forestry Commission would be a great body to do accountability from the tree canopy perspective.
They're formal citizen oversight, and they should be empowered in that respect.
That's where I'm thinking it could have alignment from empowering a board to have a real job that needs to be reported back to council and the public. And it just gives them a formal defined role to do that work.
Can I make a suggestion?
Absolutely.
Because we're already like an hour.
Right.
We-
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering if like instead of, I feel like to a certain extent, we're talking in circles a little
Right.
bit. I'm wondering if maybe we can pick out 1 or 2 of our takeaways and like really like take a recommendation, see if we have consensus on it.
Mhm.
And, go ahead and earmark that as one of our eventual recommendations.
Yeah, I'm not sure how we want to do that. If we want to read off what's been written here, or I can guide us through the stock if we want to +1 on items that are already written there. I'm not sure what
Maybe
format.
just the one takeaway, we don't have to do all of them right now, but if we could like hammer out a few recommendations on one of the takeaways, maybe communication, because we've talked a lot about that already, or the alignment.
My thought is that let's remember why we're here. We're here because the city and council proposed a massive realignment and reduction of the number of boards and all kinds of stuff that seemed like a disempowerment of citizen participants in the government process. So the term that was being used was realignment, and we are the realignment working group. So let's talk about what our recommendation is with respect to the concept of alignment. What does it mean for boards and commissions to be in alignment with city staff and with council? And what do we recommend to make it so that the work that boards and commissions do serves that purpose? That makes sense?
And to that effect, I think when the proposal was initially put forth, there was a lot of pushback, mostly to the idea of cutting the board. I didn't hear a lot of pushback in terms of actually, aligning. The alignment part didn't seem to be the issue. It was the cutting part that seemed to be the issue.
So there's so narrow.
And I agree that, it was almost like, and hearing some folks talk about it, staff and council, Well, no, we're gonna have these advisory groups. Well, you know, when I vote for president, I don't want to do a straw ballot. I want to have a vote. You know, and to me, an advisory group is sort of a straw ballot. Yeah, that's, we get a little idea which way it's flowing, but we'll still do it our way. And so I think that that's what was a concern also, is that there was, as the good word you used, was disempowerment. And so regardless of what the report said, as far as we don't feel empowered, and therefore this was even minimizing it, demolishing it even more. And I think that people did take a tremendous amount of angst with that, because it didn't seem, well, it did reduce the amount of citizen input dramatically. And as we all know, unless we read the newspapers and all, government staff are not infallible, and they make really poor decisions sometimes, and maybe an additional, maybe other input is, I think that any input is good input. And I think with the setup that we got on the other side, that we can make this work right. It's not like we're in New York City and these huge groups of people getting together and that structure that they need. We're so small enough to make it work. But we just got to get a handle on it. Alan and Jack.
One of the problems I always had is the reason why it's named advisory committee was considered a committee rather than a board and commission. And it goes back to the member of council back in 2012 designated as a committee was they did not want to have that group given the governance, community governance, and that it should have. Neither do most of the boards and commissions. They really function as advisory groups rather than community governance. And, you know, I'd love to see a model that move our boards and commissions towards a governance role from the community. And I think we would find far greater engagement with the members of our community if they knew they were part of the democratic process of decision-making in action. That doesn't happen.
Jack, we have a conversation.
Yeah, I think it's worth remembering. I don't have the details in my head, but that 5 months ago or something, there was an announcement. They made some changes to how the boards and commissions map through council committees into the council. And I think that was an attempt at realignment, quote unquote. And I remember when I read it, I thought, well, this is moving in the right direction. I don't know that the assignments were necessarily proper, but I don't know enough to judge that, but it is underway, it seems. I don't know if it's changed anything.
I think Kilgore's chair.
One of the things that I've heard today is we have these three different sorts of boards and commissions. We have boards, commissions, and committees. And I think I'm actually sort of embarrassed that we haven't clarified this earlier in our process, because we wanted to kind of lump everybody together and do a mass survey and so forth. But I am a little worried that because I don't have the legal knowledge of the different specifics of how these entities interact with staff and council, legally speaking. And my inclination would be to say that as much as possible, we should get these entities to be all operating under the same rules.
Well, I think in the very beginning, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it was supposed to be just boards and commissions. But then when I put this list together, I was going through the Google Docs and remember our surprise when Elise told us that she had broken down the member surveys by each, and a single sheet of paper for each one of these entities that responded to us. And I was just kind of looking at that. well, how many did we get from transit committee as opposed to some of these commissions and stuff? And I think committees are smaller. It seems to be, or our response back was bigger on some of the commissions than committees. But to my way, it was supposed to be reduced. But when they gave us these names of all these organizations, and I was looking at them, and I didn't realize until today that there were committees, commissions, and boards that responded to our member survey. I mean, I knew it, but I didn't know it. And I do think that we do need to clarify that. But regardless, these are all entities that are functioning under a referendum by the city council to do a certain kind of work.
Except the ABC commission, of which I was a member. They
Okay, but ABC's not on, and we didn't do it.
Yeah, that's why.
But they're all under referendum by the council that this is what they're supposed to do.
Well, and my understanding is board, commission, committee doesn't have a legal difference in the city. Certain boards have different, legislation that authorizes them. But I think that the choice of the word is entirely arbitrary in our city system. But it raises a question of why. It makes people think there's a difference. So why don't we just call them all the same thing if they're the same thing?
Lots of gain by standardizing this whole system and having everybody operating with the same set of expectations, the same set of operating procedures, the same set of reporting requirements, the same set of recruiting and onboarding systems, all that stuff, because I think you get a lot more clarity about what's working and what's not working if you have a consistent expectation.
But again, a clarification, I hate to go back, but I was part of the discussion at the time. Back in 2012, when Jan Davis, who was on city council at the time, he specifically, when that was formed, he specifically said it's just going to be an advisory committee.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be elevated to a board or position. And that's why the neighborhoods did not receive the impact that they should have with community governance.
Right.
The purpose of that board, if you look at the ordinance drafted in it, is intentionally vague.
Yeah.
To advise the city on neighborhoods. That's what it says.
That's a good thing. Uh-huh. But, and I do think too, the word advisory is very difficult also in the names of these, because I do think that may have a legal standard. So, getting back to Lisa's comment, I think that maybe, the onboarding clarity of alignment of goals kind of go together in a way. Or how we could discuss it, because it would have, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to suggest, I see where you're going here. And I was just thinking, like, based on our discussion so far today, I've heard a number of recommendations that fit into these key takeaway areas that are either around empowering boards, and then another set that were around standardization. And I'm just wondering if that's a possible way we could move from these key areas to putting recommendations under themes.
I think, I concur. I think empowerment and standardization are both really important keystone concepts in making boards and commissions more effective. Now, if there is a legal distinction that truly mandates treating one set of groups differently from another, we need to be clear about that and see what recommendations need to be modified depending on which category they fall into. If there is truly an important legal distinction that is going to have an effect on how they standardize, that's something we need to be aware of.
Well, how about if I get in touch with the city attorney? I don't want to go to Ben. because he'll have to go to the attorney anyway, so I'll just call the attorney and say, we're in the middle of this report, he's aware of it, and give us some feedback on these advisory commission, committee, and board, and where are the differences, and what kind of way they work as a business forward. And that'll give us some. But I think you're right in that we do have some things in here that we were talking about: empowerment and engagement and standardization. Do y'all agree with that?
Actually, it's already started, like the reparation commission. It's charged as a commission to make recommendations to city council. So that's already, and then the process is that city attorney vets every recommendation before it goes to council. So.
What I don't want us to have to do is to look at every referendum or document resolution that he can make each one. Well, I don't know that he necessarily, we don't need to go into, does this particular group have recommendation, and do they have to be actually, according to your operations, they have to do something about every recommendation, because we know that they totally ignore some of the recommendations that these other groups provide.
But that's the first time that this has happened, and Senator Kilgore had to talk to her in the city. I think this is one of the first times it's ever happened, where they can make the recommendations, direct recommendations, and bid it, and you don't have to use the process, but I'm just telling you how this is different.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well,
Is that true on the county level as well, Steve?
Well, they co-sign it.
Right.
So,
So
yes,
is the county attorney as well?
yes, he's there too, but everything is right. They're there together. He's
Okay.
signing off for Buncombe County, and then it goes to the county manager, and it goes to Buncombe County Commission. So it's a direct recommendation. That's how.
Well,
okay.
reparations is like unique in the regard that like whatever recommendations come out of that, there's almost certainty that there are going to be some lawsuits that say.
They hire an outside law firm to take care
Right,
of that.
right, exactly. That's why there's so much of the legal of representation involved in that, because they want to be prepared for whatever.
Exactly, because then he vets even when things are outside of Robert's rules. He's there for that, just to make sure. But
It's
this,
parliamentary.
yeah, this is the first time that a commission has actually been empowered to make recommendations that city council can act on. It is changing that whole template of advisory consent. And their job, by the way, as we discussed last meeting, the city attorney, is to put it in legal form, what we want to get done, and make it legal, or make it happen. So I don't know if it's a template, but this new council, Kilgore, and the ones who are driving the ship, and Campbell, this is a new template. You know, y'all can do it. This is how it's.
So under, so if we're looking at recommendations, so under standardization, we've said that, you know, all members have training. And you will simplify this and we'll pretty it up later, but we're going with like all members have training. And chairs and officers have additional training. You want,
So that's something we can all agree on, that there should be standardized trainings for staff, members, and officers.
yeah, okay.
And a clear charge, right?
Yes, clear charge with the time.
Expectations about reporting.
And when we say expectations about reporting, can we be more specific? I guess, is that an annual report is, a current example
Well,
of
you could say
reporting.
expectations of reporting preferably public.
Right.
Well, different kinds of reporting. There's reporting that happens in writing on a periodic basis, which helps staff with their coordination and their communication with council and city government. city hall government. But then there's also the public presentation, so that the public has an understanding of what's happening, what's being recommended. And that should happen regularly enough to encourage people to pay attention. And it also, like I said, if you know that you're expecting to go before council 3 or 4 times a year, that's going to encourage you to kind of get something happening. It would be embarrassing to stand up and just this is about, well, we didn't manage to meet the last 3 months because we had vacation and nobody had this,
Now, the notes I took when Ina mentioned that earlier about the reports to council, public reports, at the council meeting, with its own agenda item, greater than annual, whether that be semi-annual or quarterly, monthly is going to work. That it should be treated as a dialogue between the board and the council on issues that should be addressed in law. And it should be taken as seriously as staff reports and committee.
Just a bit of like being realistic here. There are only, if the council meets every 2 weeks, there's only 26 council meetings a year, and there's 20 boards. So if we had one board present at each meeting, you're only going to get one per year. And in terms of wanting a dialogue, you're more likely to get an actual dialogue if you're at a council committee as opposed to the full council. Then, Patrick gave a presentation to board and commission, council committee recently, and there's actually some back and forth that went on with that. And I also feel like in terms of getting some actual traction in terms of our recommendation, I think we're more likely to get traction if our recommendation was to have these regular reports made to a council committee as opposed to the full council. And I understand, Nina, why you would want it as a full council meeting. I totally understand that. I think we're gonna have more chance of like actually just getting to the full of it. And then if the council committee, kind of like how we did when we went to board of commissions, and then they supported us making a full presentation. If the council committee feels like what was presented was significant enough to go to the full council, then
It's like we went to the board of commissions committee. They recommended to the council.
I just felt the way the alignment with the committee to a council committee is really important, because then you're going to take what that committee is doing and, directly, you have this like chain of command.
Okay, so just a couple of thoughts in response to that, Elise. The first is, I'm not envisioning a report to council of being more than about 5 minutes. So you could have board reports on the agenda very easily and not have it take up a huge amount of time. But I do think that council meetings get much more public attention, and the potential for, public engagement is much greater than a committee level case. What was my second point? Well, oh, yes, sorry. It is, one of the reasons that we're here was because the realignment project, and there are way too many boards and commissions and committees. You're saying 26.
I think there's about 20, but like 26 council meetings.
Okay, right, 26 council meetings. Okay, so 20. I think, and feel free to disagree vehemently with me, and castigate me mercifully on this, but I think that there is a reality that we probably do have too many entities. And that some of them are withering on the vine for lack of any participation at all, or real good, strong leadership and recruitment. So I think that there is an argument to be made that there could be some consolidation, and then we would have fewer entities to report, but they would have a more lively and active forum participants prepared to make that kind of contribution. So just saying that there may have been some value to thinking about how dilute the boards are currently, and whether there would be some way to reallocate the distribution of those boards to make them more focused, more energized, more pertinent to what's actually being done. I would recommend some consolidation. I don't have any specifics, but I think it's something you need to address, because that was one of the primary concerns. And when you have staff who are liaisons, quiet at meetings and all that, it's definitely burdensome. There is an argument for doing some consolidation here. And it should be made easier by standardization.
I do think, if you use the council committee structure, one of the things, and we know that our liaisons are there all the time, staff liaisons are at all the meetings. But getting a your council liaison to a committee, commission, or board meeting is rare, unless we've got some real big issues going on. It's very.
It depends on the council member. Council member Ronnie shows up all the time.
Yeah, okay, you're right.
She listens on YouTube.
Okay, so you're right, there, and that has been true throughout the years. However, if we use this council function, you can get some easier buy-in. They supposedly have an affinity for what it is you're doing. That's why they're your liaison. And hopefully you can build that affinity before you get to a council public level. And to have an advocate before you get to council is helpful. It's always helpful, because they'll speak up, hopefully. They will ask questions, hopefully. They will get some engagement and dialogue going that the other members probably won't do.
Yes.
I don't think this is an either or thing. I think it needs to be both.
Well, I think though that we, as far as when we're looking at this, we need to pull in this council committee structure also, because we haven't really talked about that.
Yeah, I would suggest, I think concerns about volume are valid. We can't, meetings are not going to go an hour longer because 5 boards are presenting at each one. But I think a recommendation to have every board report regularly to a council committee in a public fashion with the ability to request a vote to move them up to full council if they feel what they're presenting has that level of value. I think that's one way we could achieve more opportunities for boards to present. They could do it more often if it's to a committee instead of council, but at least there's a standard clear pathway that they know they can or should ask that committee to push them up to full council. I think that's one of the parts that's not standardized now, that all boards don't know that they can request to present at either a council committee or full council and what process to follow.
My only objection here is that represents, there's a level of gatekeeping that happens there. And I would like, to me, I feel that it's important that if council thinks it's important enough that we have such a board, then it should also be important enough to hear from that board. I mean, otherwise, why have it at all? And if you want to hear from it, then I feel like the public should hear from it too. And let's face it, council committees, nobody's showing up for council committees.
There's 70 views on the YouTubes for a lot of these. I'm like looking at the streams and they're like 70, 50, equity or planning and economic development has 132 views.
So you get 132 people
Tune in.
to the YouTube.
Yeah.
And I watched it while it was live and watched it later.
Yeah. But you're right, it's not as many people. It's normally about, for the council committees, it's usually like 750 or like 1,000 if it's like a really, like the topic, the agenda is really big. There isn't, you're right, there isn't as
So
much
I
information.
think what I'm objecting to here is this sort of having to grovel for permission. It seems to me there ought to be at least one guaranteed opportunity to be heard at the full council level for every one of these boards and commissions, at least annually. You know, here's a spot, we expect to hear from you. We think it's important that our boards and commissions have a public profile and are seen to be contributing to the dialogue of government.
But I do agree that there's some gatekeeping, and I see that with staff too, with your staff liaisons, and that can happen also. But if we standardize the training of these groups, then they will know that they have the right to go directly to council if they feel that they should, if that's necessary. And they can bypass the council committee if they find the need to do so.
You have to be, the city manager has to give them permission to be under the report section.
Right, or they can go to public comment.
Right, yeah.
You know, there are two different tracks. One is one way, one is a little
We have
bit
to be
more.
realistic
We
about
could
what
recommend otherwise. We could recommend otherwise. We could recommend that council reserve a spot on their agenda for a report from a board at every meeting. Maybe it'll be used, maybe it won't. But
we can recommend that. I don't think that they're going to accept that recommendation. I think they're more likely to accept a recommendation if, you know, if I don't know how many council committees there are, it's like
Five or six.
So if you have 20 boards, that's an average of like somewhere between 4 and 5 committees each. If you've got, I think they usually meet once a month, so now you got 12 slots for 5 boards. I feel like having 10 minutes is, 5 minutes is not a lot of time to talk about what you want to talk about. I feel like if our recommendation is each committee should definitely have a slot on their agenda for an advisory board to present to them. And then there are some boards where they're not going to have very much to say. And I think there should be a little bit of a filtering process from the council committee before you're getting up there and you're going to get 1,000 views from the public and maybe you don't have very much to say. But if the expectation is that at least once or twice a year they're going to present to the council committee, then that's the little bit of that's the stick. And then the carrot is, well, if what you have to say at that council committee meeting is good enough, then you get to go on to the council.
I know that's not probably what you wanted to hear.
Oh,
But I do think that they've got this council committees for a reason. And we need to acknowledge that, and let's first try to work within their system and help them to see that they can expand their system, to be more transparent and to be more open. But work within the structure they have before we tell them to.
here's my feeling. If you have a board and commission that has nothing to recommend and nothing to say, then why does it exist?
Well, that would be
The process will figure some of that.
Yeah,
out.
I was gonna say, so that's why, this is a winnowing process. If people are embarrassed because they have nothing to say, then they need to disband.
Well, and I think that if you've got a good council member who's sitting on that council committee and they say, look, we've given, the recreation board is actually probably a pretty good example. We've given the recreation board 3 opportunities to come and talk to us about what they're doing, and they've never once showed up, then why the hell do we have one? So let's go ahead and reevaluate the need for that particular board.
And
Done.
And I actually like having 2 levels here because I think most boards would be able to go to a committee, ask to present to council and make it through. I think the end result should be an almost annual report from an annual presentation from every board. And yes, there's an extra step along the way, but I tend to feel it's beneficial to go through that additional step in the process if you make it all the way up to city council, because you've heard some questions, you've heard some concerns, people can share public comment at 2 levels instead of just at the 1. And I tend to feel that that would allow boards to share more things that might be specific to an area of interest of a council committee that they might not necessarily want to go into the same level of detail at a formal council meeting. So I tend to, like, I agree on the one hand with Nina's concerns. We don't want to create additional gatekeeping, additional barriers to access. At the same time, if the system was working as it should, a board should be able to get 2 votes out of 3 on a council committee to make it through to do a public presentation. And if they're not, then something is broken either with the council committee or the board.
Well, maybe part
They
of-
also give the board and commission to kind of refine the report based on the feedback they're getting among those 3 members of council. So, you know, if they do have an opportunity to move up, get elevated to the full council, then I think they're kind of more aligned with the interests of council based on the feedback that they've gotten from the council committee.
That was my point, was getting the feedback. Yeah, if you're not getting the 2 out of 3 support from your committee, but you've gotten maybe 2 opportunities that year to go to that council committee and get the feedback that helps you refine it. So then ultimately you could get the council committee. And that's one thing, I do respect that you have so much, that you want the public to be so involved, like directly with council. I do respect that.
Here's another concern that I raise about this a lot, and I hear the valid reasons why it could be useful to have them go through committees. What if the recommendations are radical? What if there's something that council hasn't heard before and it isn't going to get 2 out of 3 votes because it's something quite different from business as usual? Is the only recourse then to go to public comment? That doesn't seem right to me.
Using the city's current rules, the other option that exists is you could get 3 council members to request your report be added to the agenda. Most people don't know that rule exists, but it does. I don't know if that's something we should include as another route, but just hearing you say that, if you can't get through your committee, in my mind, using the current rules, it would be to get any 3 council members to say, we want this on the agenda, which is supposed to force the city manager to add it. I don't know if that helps. Yeah.
We're gonna see that in next year.
So sometimes we pretend these rules don't. When there's a 4-3 split on council, you'll see that rule getting used all the time by 3 members. When council's split otherwise, like it does, you don't hear about it for a while.
The other thing that I feel like is missing from this, and again, I understand, I can see the benefits of having something doing all that. But this is not going to be easy for every person who participates in a board. And in fact, I know for sure that many people who participate in boards have no interest in standing up in public and saying or being, written about in the newspaper or what have you. But there are people who do see that as something that they want to do. They want to have a visible presence and impact. They don't want to be anonymous. They don't want to be, they want to feel effective. And one way to feel effective is to be heard in public. You have people who have the civic engagement and the desire to participate in the workings of government. One of the ways they come up is through boards and commissions. And that's where leadership can develop. That's where community focus can happen. And it seems to me that it is in our interest as a society to encourage those folks to be empowered, to be visible. And being communicating just isn't, it's just not the same.
I'm curious in this context, what if someone on the board felt that there was an issue that should be heard and through all avenues that are available to them, it never elevated out of the commission or board or whatever? What would happen to them if they were to write a dissenting opinion and send it to John Boyle, the watchdog, or there's some other way to make public their opinion that this is an important issue that should be exposed? Do they immediately get booted off that board?
There is definitely a sentiment that there's definitely like discouragement of that type of behavior, it feels like.
Discouraged by who?
Staff.
That's just enough to make me right on.
Right. Which I mean, and so long as the rest of your board agrees to it, I don't see why you couldn't.
Well, you can write with an individual. Say I'm on this board. But say I've come to know.
I think of a specific example. I think it was like the Human Relations Commission made some recommendations around the city's encampment policy when they clear camps. And some members, I don't think with a full vote of the board, like spoke to city council and said, we think you should make these policy changes. And the way staff responded to that was at the next meeting as part of the agenda, telling everyone, don't make recommendations that don't have the full consent of the board. So that's kind of how staff responds in a way that discourages people from doing that. And in some ways I get it, you know, a body has to be able to act in unison, but you also don't want everyone interested in a topic to feel like they're losing their ability to advocate individually or even as subgroups of the full body. And really that ability should be either lifted up or protected rather than being shut down.
Staff has done the same thing with their forest members of the Urban Forestry Commission. The last transit meeting that I watched, they gave that little statement again that members of the transit committee should make sure to emphasize that they are not speaking on behalf of.
Well, that's fine,
the whole.
but they should still
There's
speak.
a little passive aggressive. They have come up with passive aggressive.
Yeah, I mean, I can see them saying, don't represent yourself as speaking for the board. That's fine. But if they're being discouraged from speaking at all, that's a big problem, and now I'm pissed.
Well, and should they not be able to say I'm a member of this body? They should be, right?
Say, I remember, but I am speaking as an individual.
You're right.
You know, I am not representing the board, and I think that's fine too.
Is this a standardization or empowerment recommendation potentially? Yeah.
I think it's empowerment, but I think it would come under your training.
Right. You don't, if staff is actively trying to shut people up, I don't think it's wrong.
Yeah, I mean,
There's a couple members of Urban Forestry Commission who would love to talk to you about that. There are two members in particular. One of them responded to the survey and was quite frank about getting kicked out basically because of his outspoken, and then another member of the Urban Forestry Commission who has also been very vocal, has also kind of been like spoken to, I guess is the way you might put it.
well, I'm having this discussion about this kind of one recommendation, so to speak. I'm thinking that maybe our layout is going to need to be an overview paragraph saying, based on the analysis, we saw X, Y, and Z. Therefore, our recommendation is A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So to give a little bit of background, to give it some, not just say, okay, we think that you should have all members have training and say it's required for them to move forward.
We did specific about what kind.
Well, I know, but that's what I'm thinking, that we'll have a paragraph that says, in looking at all of the responses, this was something that seemed to be lacking and also that, maybe undermine the confidence of chairs and staff to take a stand forward or something like that, and then say, this is our recommendation, whatever it might be, but give an explanation as to kind of where, give it some context before we get into
Well,
it.
you're doing that, right? I mean,
Well, I'm just talking about standards of the report.
I don't think we've really, addressed the whole, clearly enough, the whole staff. Are they there, are they filtered? Are they there to assist and, help that particular board to, get their views, their reports for council? What is the relationship between staff and board chairs and vice chairs and so forth? It needs to be clarified.
Yeah, well, I mean, Sarah was very explicit about that.
It's their
Back when we
it's not their
were,
responsibility.
What's that?
Their responsibility is really facilitating.
it's not,
or not even facilitating meetings, it's really just to be there to answer questions.
But the settlement, the settlement is.
Yeah,
they're
that's
scheduled-
really all.
What does that role mean? Facilitate.
Well,
We need to clarify that.
I think what we're saying is that
And a
they
representation.
find you the meeting space, they send out the meeting notices, they provide the minutes to the meeting in whatever format that might be.
And if the body that's meeting has questions as they relate to policy, they answer those questions.
Or expert subject matter.
Right, but it's not really the staff's duty to elevate their ideas.
Right, it's, the chair is the facilitator.
How often does that take place though, versus staff kind of
I think there's some corralling.
controlling?
Yeah, there definitely is. some
Right.
corralling.
And maybe they, right, in my ideal world, staff are there to basically be the supporting role to make this group of volunteers make their time valuable and make it beneficial to the city.
And it's like in the urban trail meeting the other day, we were talking about the need, believe it or not, the need for hard copy maps in the trail. People are clamoring for them. They're expensive. And we said to Stephanie, well, is there any money? She says, yeah, I've got some money for that. It was be about X amount of dollars. Okay, great. We didn't have to wait to go to the next meeting. We didn't have to call somebody. We didn't have to try to ferret through that damn budget ourselves or whatever. But, and so, and then moved on, you know, kind of thing. So they're there for that kind of stuff too. Hopefully move the meeting forward so you don't have to advance the ideas and stuff like that.
well, that does raise the question of when a board has a recommendation or, you know, wants to get some maps printed or whatever, where there's either money or staff time that has to be dedicated to make it happen. Does that have to go up through the city manager and then back down? Does it have to go to city council and then to the city manager and back down? Or is there actual lateral discretion among city staff to say, okay, yeah, we can spend money on that, or yeah, we can dedicate staff time to that? How does that actually?
That's a good question.
I think this is, I said, you know, that Stephanie and Carly on the urban trail are kind of mid and high level. I think this is partly why they are mid and high level, that they can direct they can self-direct their hours. They can self-direct some of the stuff that they're doing. And so if their goals for the year are to XYZ with the public art, and they see getting maps out as being part of that goal, then yeah, they're gonna spend some time on that. I've never seen them ever say, I should say it this way. I've heard them say, I can't get that done until April because we've got the XYZ coming up. But I've never heard them say, I cannot do that ever. Because I simply don't have the
Well,
time,
I mean, this is interesting to me because
or I have to get permission.
I would be very curious to know what percentage of boards actually get city money spent on something they recommended without going up the chain and back down. That's surprising to me to hear that is actually a thing that happens. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying I'm surprised.
Well, that's why, like we were saying with transportation, it took 6 years, you had to get the money into the budget and it had been built in over the years. The first year was minor, second year was more, the third year. And so, and this is part of what staff is supposed to be helping you with, is to move those kinds of things up the ladder. That's what they are supposed to
So-
facilitate.
I mean, this is the lack of clarity about how recommendations get enacted
Mhm.
in this relationship is weird. This seems like one of those things that, like, there ought to be a standard procedure. You know, can you just appeal to the person who has the purse strings for this particular government subset? I mean, I don't know. That seems odd to me. I'm actually really surprised to hear that. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it ought to be clarified. And I mean, can boards and commissions direct the spending of money by city staff on their recommendations? Just because. Is that a thing?
It depends on the largeness of the ask. Like for that, last year we started doing the Festival of Neighborhoods, and the ask was small enough that Cape, you might have been like $3,000. Cape took it out of their personal like public engagement budget to help support the Festival of Neighborhoods. Because it was successful, they then on our behalf made a larger request, like an actual like $5,000 for the upcoming year to make that happen.
To put it into the official budget.
Yeah,
To get a line item in the budget.
yeah.
So, and I think that's an example of how it does happen, but certain boards are told, don't ask for money, like, because that's not your role, so.
And the staff supports you or not. So I have
Right.
2 examples here. I have the example with Neighborhood Advisory Committee where staff work really collaboratively with a working group of our board members and public members to put on the Fest of Neighborhoods. Then you got this $300,000 that was originally earmarked. So now I'm talking about MMDC and transit. There were $300,000 that was originally earmarked for a joint city-county study for a like joint master plan. The city put in 300, the county was supposed to match it. They did not. So then that $300,000 was being redirected somewhere else. And although multiple public groups, although the transit committee and members of MMTC have all written letters supporting that $300,000 is used to pilot increased frequency along the S3, S6 line, staff has been very adamant that instead they want to use that money for a financial and operational review, which is supposed to look at the whole system, kind of reevaluate things now that COVID has happened, ridership trends have changed, and it's supposed to give like small recommendations for making the system solvent, basically. And what that really means is that they're probably going to cut some lines. That's what that means. And there has been a lot of public emails sent to the members of planning and economic development saying that they want the pilot frequency, but then staff gets up there and gives a presentation and they just talk about, well, we want to do this, we want to do this, and they don't really give any merit to what the public has strongly requested.
That seems to me like an example. I think that would be addressed if there was a clear recommendations pathway, because then it would be up to staff to convince your committee why they should or shouldn't make the recommendation you're making. Right now, it's like you all can kind of recommend something, but then staff can issue a conflicting recommendation. And who has the real power? I mean, I think committees, boards, and staff can both tell council what they think, but there's not a clear delineation of who communicates how. Yeah.
That's not facilitating.
Well, and they sometimes might disagree.
But there will be conversation. For commission.
I just think like our system should understand that possibility occurs instead of naively believing that staff and boards will always be on the same page. And we should give council it's ultimately going to be council that decides which way they want to go. But it's frustrating. We can't even share the two options.
In that meeting, did you have people from or operate different opinions?
So I've had just like small like coffee meetings with myself and another MFTC member talking with staff. You know, us saying why we want this, and the staff member saying, I understand, but staff wants this. And then the transit meeting will come up, and again, those same members will say, well, we're hearing from the public, we want this. And staff will again say, well, we want this because of this. And then you get to planning and economic development, and staff gets to give a presentation, but the public comment has just been through the form of email. I guess someone should have submitted a public comment to like actually be read. I mean, you can call in to do that kind of thing. But it wasn't like there was a chance for
Right.
public members or like an organized group of public members to give a disagreeing.
So that really diminishes the.
Yeah.
No wonder
Yeah.
people feel this is happening.
Right.
Right.
And there have been other like ARTC, the Asheville Redefined Transit Coalition, which is like a whole bunch of different organizations coming together. They all want this increased frequency, and it's falling on deaf ears.
So we have 5 minutes here, and we might overtake the idea of the leadership, but I think we should decide what we're going to do next.
Yes.
Okay, so my thought is that let me sit down and work with some of the things that we've come up with today on this 2 areas of what did I have? Clarity of mission and alignment and the onboarding, and put together sort of a template of how we want to set these up.
Can we work from this recommendations document that we
That's,
had?
yeah, kind of what I think. I think you've got some new ideas written here, so it'd be good to add those to this document if you're willing to do that,
Is
Stacy.
that- Are you saying in chat?
I'm saying I added some of our notes here at the bottom of the document, but
Okay.
most of this is the working notes that several people have added to here, just
Okay.
different, each, what do we call these, key takeaway area. We've got a few recommendations under each, and it feels like there's some way we need to categorize or rank these as a next step.
I send that to me.
This document?
What
Yeah.
you typed up today, and let me play with it. And then I'll send that to you, and we'll go from there.
Maybe we ought to version this.
It does automatically, I can make a copy of it as it is today if we want to do that. Yeah.
Let's do that.
We have kind of like voting feature or something, where
That-
like people can indicate how many people support something.
That's what I'm wondering, like, I guess there's 2 ways we could go. We could either asynchronously outside this meeting, everyone goes through everything written on the page here and adds your initial if you want to vote in favor of a concept. Should we do that?
But do you want me to compress some of these things and see if put some like things together before we do anything?
I think there's probably some like, repetition. in
Right,
it.
yeah, let me do that, and then, then just, maybe give it a 1, 2, or 3 vote. Just, 1 is and 2 is and.
How many people are actually like actively
It's us.
involved now?
It's us.
Because I'm wondering if we had like a table and each person got a column and you got to rate it like 0 to 3 of like how much you support something.
Okay, I can do that.
And then you can
Okay,
add it to
Yeah.
it.
yeah.
So
Is
state,
there room for adding anything at this point, or?
Yeah, like if you had a table, then you could just add row at the bottom, the trunk thing, and then just before we meet again, you went through it like today and mark your choices, you should check it again before our next meeting.
And may I ask that we also have a notes option?
Okay.
Where we put our
Um,
comments,
Mhm.
and particularly, I recommend that we flag things according to which of our two takeaways this addresses. So that when we go to write out a recommendation, we have a clear sense of what recommendation is categorized with which takeaway, and, you know, is it in service of standardization or empowerment or of clarity or.
Right. I see categorization as one of the things we need to do here, and then we need to establish consensus or some way to vote on things that are common. I think the question I have is, we need to create some format for that to occur. Should Stacy go through first and try to deduplicate or unify these concepts first? Do we think that would be helpful first?
Yeah.
And then we can all vote off of that list?
And
Okay.
I can see if I can, it may just come to me in doing this, that the categories might just jump right out at me if they're just a little bit soupier than that.
Kind of like how reparations has their impact focus areas. I think we need to have.
Yeah, I think so too. But we'll see. Yeah.
When should we meet next?
I don't have my calendar with me right now.
We
I'm
should.
wondering if we can have like an extra meeting, just,
Yeah.
I really want to see this moving forward.
Right.
I'm going to next go back to council.
2 weeks.
Yeah. I think we should definitely, whatever.
I brought some dates in online.
Yeah. I mean, do we,
Okay, 2
Don't
weeks
wanna-
from now is, I think,
April 29th.
oh, is it that way? Okay. The week before that's back. So 29th or later.
could be the 29th at the same time, at our regular time, so 5:30 to 7. We could use that as a placeholder, and I can send an email out to see if that works. And then we would plan to just meet again at our regular time in May.
I do say that I think, meeting in person has been very useful and that we should consider doing it again.
You need face-to-face meeting the next time?
Like we're doing here? Yeah. I'll put it out there and we'll see if everyone's able to attend again. I don't mind coming here to do it this way.
My sense is that you get a feel for where people are at a lot quicker. And I think you can move the ball down the field more effectively if we're near space.
Yeah.
Honestly, I have to say that the 6th and the 13th of May are going to be those from me, but the 29th.
Okay.
I'm traveling, yeah.
Where are you going?
New York City, and then I'll be in Chicago the week after that.
How fun.
That's
That is good. Okay, well, we'll, move through those dates. Are you gone both on?
No, but so the week before, there's a band that I really like that's playing in National Democratic, but that's when I go to New York City. And then they're touring the rest of the region while we're in New York City. So I'm flying to Chicago just to see the band. Portugal the Man.
I have never heard of it, but I'm excited you have a great time.